The AMD Ryzen 5 2600X came out about 5 years ago in 2018, and it's still an incredible CPU. If you look at a lot of even newer games, what they're asking for as far as specs goes, minimum specs, this meets or exceeds it by far, and even on the recommended specs, it's usually meets or exceeds that, or is pretty close to it. The only one I've seen so far, and this wasn't exhaustive, but was the Star Wars Jedi Survivor. It for recommended said 5600X. So the 2600X is still great CPU, and you can pick them up pretty cheaply off of something like AliExpress for like $50 Canadian. So it's probably more like 40 or less US. But if you're wondering, can this CPU handle a newer GPU? Like, what kind of performance can you expect? How bad will the bottleneck be? Well, in this video, I went and tested the Gigabyte 6750 XT, which 6700X, 6750 XT, in my mind, is probably one of the best values for a GPU that you can get right now for 1440p gaming. So I tested this out. The system has ignored that GPU. I just put that in because I do plan on selling it. It's got 16 gigabytes of RAM. It is a 3600 CL18 kit, but I had to drop it down a bit to 3200 CL16 just because there were some stability issues, and I didn't want to get around with tweaking the voltages. So I had to turn that down to 3200 CL16. It's got a 500 gig NVMe drive. It's the MSI B450A Pro Max for the motherboard. And beyond that, there's not much else to note except the GPU used was the Gigabyte 6750 XT. Now, I've tested it out in several games, which we will see, and I was actually quite surprised by the performance that the 2600X was able to put out to keep up with the 6750 XT. At 1080p, it does bottleneck in most cases, but when you move up to 1440p, that bottleneck essentially disappears. Older games, yes, there are going to be a bottleneck, but that's not what I was testing. Chances are, if you're looking to get a newer, higher-end GPU, you're probably going to want to play newer AAA titles. So that's what I tested here. So we tested Star Wars Jedi Survivor, Cyberpunk 2077, Warzone 2, and Fortnite. I did both tests. I tested it for DirectX 12 with Unreal Engine 5. So nanite on, everything was on. And then I also did it in performance mode just to give you an idea with both types of settings, what kind of performance you can expect. And I did it for 1080p and 1440p. Anyway, overall, I'd say if you're looking to upgrade, something in the ballpark performance-wise of a 6750 XT does pair perfectly with the 2600X. So if you're on the fence about whether you need to upgrade your entire system or if you just get by on upgrading your GPU, you can get by on just upgrading your GPU. Let's get into looking at the benchmarks. Even with the 2600 starting to get a little long in the tooth, it's a bit older. It came out in 2018. When looking at newer games, we're just going to use a few here as an example, it's still ranking up there higher than the minimum requirements. Looking at Star Wars Jedi Survivor, this one came out not too long ago. Minimum CPU requirement is a 1400. A 2600X is far beyond that in performance, but it is recommending a 5600X, and coincidentally the recommended GPU is a 6700 XT, and we have a 6750 XT. So we'll try it out in this game and see how well the 2600X holds up. It would be nice if it actually specified what you could expect under recommended settings. If they're looking at 1080p, 1440p, averaging 30 FPS, it doesn't say. So we will take a look and see how well it holds up there. Moving on to a little bit of an older game, but it has gotten a lot of updates, so it does have some, it does have a little bit more of a requirement to play the game. But again, oddly enough, I thought it would be higher, but it's not. Under like minimum system requirements were 3570K. That came out God knows how long ago. Like, that's an old CPU, or an FX 8310, very old CPUs. Even oddly enough, the graphics cards are pretty low. So it's not telling what the minimum requires is going to provide, but I don't even think that's 1080p. That's probably like 720p or something like that. Under recommended, it's saying a 3200G. The 2600X is going to perform better than a 3200G. So it should at least meet the minimum requirements there, as well as graphics. It's saying a 1060 or an RX 590. The 6700 XT is a much better GPU than that. So we'll be testing these at 1440p and see how well they hold up. And then here's Modern Warfare 2. Again, it's got quite a bit of system specifications, just because you can play with full graphics on ultra, all that stuff, or you can do competitive settings, which is turning down a lot of the graphics and those features, so that you can end up getting a higher FPS performance out of the GPU. But looking at recommended settings, it's a 1400. 2600X is much better than that. Same for Ultra 4K. We won't be playing that because the 6750 XT is not going to hit 4K Ultra, but it's a 3900X. So we're kind of sitting in the middle there. Competitive settings is saying 1800X. I'm assuming that's because there's going to be a lot of high FPS and you're going to need a much faster CPU than a 1400 to keep up with it. But this is just kind of a snapshot of some newer games and what the system specifications are. So I foresee the 2600 doing a very good job, should be able to do a good job of keeping up with the game, not causing any hiccups there. However, the 6750 XT is a pretty powerful GPU considering the age gap, because this would have came out a couple of years ago versus almost 5 years for the 2600X. So we will see how well it performs. Let's start off with Jedi Survivor. Alright, so we're going to start off with Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and we'll do it at 1080p on high settings and see how it goes from here. I haven't played this in a little bit and I cannot remember all the buttons do, but that's not the point of this. So far at 1080p on high settings, we are... Okay, something is limiting what the GPU can do. So I think we're a little CPU limited here at 1080p, because it's spiking, going from 50% up to 77%, but the CPU is staying around 50%. So it was kind of be expected. At 1080p, I would expect the 2600 to kind of bottleneck the 6750 XT. I wasn't expecting this kind of bottleneck. It's quite substantial. But again, this is 1080p. This card is meant for 1440p. So that is where I'd be more curious as to how much of a bottleneck this is going to be. So let's up the resolution, because right now at 67 average FPS, we went through a fight scene and things like that. That's not too bad. The 1% lows are 43, so it's keeping up there. You're not going to see too much jittering or anything like that. So the 2600X isn't causing like some frame time spikes with the GPU, and it's not causing any issues during gameplay either. So let's try 1440p. Let's restart. Yeah, so we're all at 98%, 97%. So we're getting essentially 100% GPU utilization. Let's take a little run around here. So again, during that fight scene, we dipped down to 43 FPS, which was the same under 1080p, and though we are only averaging 52 FPS, so it is a little bit lower. You can play with the settings a little bit more, probably squeeze some more performance out of it. I have it on high. The kicker with this is one of the newer, more demanding games, so it's definitely going to be putting, especially at 1440p, more stress on the GPU than the CPU. So I'd say this gives you a pretty good idea of the kind of performance you can expect on this game. And keep in mind, going forward, more games are going to be using things like Unreal Engine 5, which is very GPU demanding. So it's not a bad idea to buy it's not a bad idea to pair a newer GPU with older hardware, like a CPU, just because the games aren't going to be as CPU intensive as they are GPU intensive. So Cyberpunk 2077 is no slouch either. It came out a couple years ago, but it's still a fairly GPU demanding game. And this is before the Phantom Liberty expansion pack. So from what I heard, it's going to be even more demanding with that patch. This is before that. We're going to start off at 1080p and graphics. I have any sort of DLSS or anything turned on. There's no resolution scaling, and everything else is set to high, and we'll give it a shot here. So let's see, right now we're sitting, okay, at 1080p, we are nearing 100% GPU utilization, and we're hitting like that 60% CPU utilization. So it seems like Cyberpunk 2077 is more capable of using multi-core than Jedi Survivor. We're getting much better frame rates. It's nearing 100 average FPS with a 1% low of 87 FPS, so that's not too bad. Let's see what happens when we get into a fire. Yeah, we're gonna take you out. That works. Anyone else around here? Let's see. All right, so just playing around for a bit, gotten a little bit of a firefight. Now we're cruising around, and the FPS so far is holding up very well. Surprisingly, I thought we'd be hitting. Wow, geez, this game actually uses a lot of the CPU. We're hitting up to 75%. So this game is actually doing a very good job of 90%. So it's doing a great job of handling multi-core. The multi-core CPU. So GPU is spiking up there, and in this case, CPU is higher than the GPU. So this is crazy CPU intensive game. Especially driving around here, it's using up a lot of the CPU versus the GPU. This game is doing a great job of utilizing the 2600X, but it definitely would benefit from something a little faster. Like the 3600, probably more ideally the 5600X. Alright, so jumping from 1080p up to 1440p is, you know, a much larger impact on the GPU performance. We went from averaging like 100 FPS down to 67. So we are putting a little bit more, putting more of the workload on the GPU than the CPU. We're down to still pretty good. We're getting over 50% CPU utilization. So it still shows that the game is doing a really good job of utilizing all those cores. But still, a lot of games do benefit from having a much stronger single core performance, which going up to like a 3600X or a 5600X would probably have like a 15 to 30% boost in single core performance depending on which CPU you go to. But so far, just cruising around here and trying not to crash, we're still averaging 63 FPS. So that's definitely playable with the 1% low at 51. That's a lot better. We're not seeing near the spikes with the graph just because the CPU is not going up in the 80-90% range. It's at the 60%, 65% range. We're not getting those huge CPU spikes. I can't aim worth, I'm gonna be dead. Definitely need to do some upgrades here. Oh, I'm dead. Okay, we're gonna do Modern Warfare 2 Warzone. We'll start off again at 1080p. And then we'll set, okay, make sure everything, resolution's off. Quality, let's apply that. And we will set this preset to, let's do balanced. I always find it a little difficult in Warzone to do any sort of testing because I always die way too fast. So let's see if I can change that. So just running around a tower right now, trying to find a better weapon instead of this little pea shooter. As you can tell, the GPU just running around this building is not being utilized quite so much. We're only sitting around like the 50% mark. We'll see if that changes. Yeah, so this is, well, I think a lot of CPUs might bottleneck this GPU at 1080p in this game. However, it's not bottlenecking it enough. We're still getting a really high frame rate, and I bet you once we go to 1440p, things will look a lot better. So you'll probably still be able to manage to keep the same sort of frame rate, if not higher, but with a better resolution. And again, this game is designed, it's free, so it's going to be designed to run with more hardware, lower quality hardware than some of the other games. So at 1440p, we are getting a slightly higher GPU utilization, but still not using 100%. Certain situations it seems to be peaking at around 80, but that's about as high as it goes. And again, we do have it on balanced settings, so if you want to up that a little bit to the max settings, you definitely have room to do that. However, we're sitting at a nice average of 92 FPS with a 1% low of 53. Nothing too crazy on the spikes, frame type spikes. So I'm going to go with 1080p. We're going to use high settings. We have temporal resolution on native, and everything is on high, lumens on, all that good stuff. So this just goes to show you how demanding Unreal Engine 5 is, because we're getting pretty much full utilization of the GPU. It's between 90 and 95%, and we're getting around 86 FPS. So graphics wise, it's a pretty demanding game. And this is only 1080p. So we'll run around here outside a little bit, see how it goes. But so far it's not too bad. Average of 85 with a 1% low of 62. It's pretty good. Yeah, even that, we're still a little bit of a firefight. And that just shows you that you pretty much get full utilization out of the 6750 XT 1080p using a 2600X. It's not much for stuttering. The frame time is pretty smooth. I'd say pretty good pairing. Let's try it at 1440p. Just based off what we're seeing now, I feel like 1440p is going to have a big performance impact. Oh. Kind of. So we had a drop to, quite a bit of a drop, with almost 30 FPS, if not more. Drop. We're now sitting at 50 FPS, and the GPU utilization has gone up a little bit more. Now we're going between 95, 98%, where before it was more between 90 and 95%. So we are experiencing essentially 100% GPU utilization. So yeah, there you go. Unreal Engine 5 with DirectX 12 enabled. It's a very demanding game, so it's putting a lot more, stress on the GPU than the CPU. So 2600X, if this is how you plan on playing Fortnite, is completely fine. Let's see how it does in performance mode. So we switched over to performance mode. Maybe we'll go down to 1080p. It doesn't make much of a difference between 1080p and 1440p, but we'll just do performance mode, 1080p. Have some texture, we're gonna see far away. That's about all of it. It does turn down the graphics quite a bit so that you can, achieve a higher FPS and smoother game. So let's see how well this does. So as you can see at this resolution, with these settings on performance mode, there is a CPU bottleneck, and that's just the way it is because we're using performance mode, which really drops the graphics down, gets rid of any of the shadowing, things like that, so that A, it's less demanding on the game or on your GPU, but also there's just less distracting. Things pop out more and don't get hidden. So this, you'd end up with a CPU bottleneck. Doesn't matter if it's 1080p, 1440p, you could probably even easily play this at 4K on these settings. But yeah, this should give you an idea of what to expect if you want to pair an older CPU with something like a 6750 XT or a 3060 Ti or a 3070, anything like that. And for the most part, if you want to play a AAA title at 1440p, you're not going to see any bottleneck. This is meant to play at 1440p. The 2600X does a great job of keeping up with the CPU at that resolution. It's not going to play 4K. You would end up with a horrible frame rate at that resolution unless you're using some kind of upscaling. And then on the flip side, at 1080p, still, we're not seeing too bad of a bottleneck, but if you're playing older games, those older games definitely would experience a bottleneck. Even at 1440p, older games would experience a bottleneck as well. The 6700 XT just can't keep up with that kind of frame rate. However, the 2600X can't keep up with that kind of frame rate. However, you'd still be able, that wouldn't be something to discourage me from pairing these two. If I'm thinking in the future, games in the future I'd want to play, where they're getting more demanding, especially where Unreal Engine 5, more games are going to be based on that. This is probably going to be a great pairing as long as the, the minimum specs ask for a 2600X or lower. If they want a CPU that's higher than that, it's mainly because the game needs a more powerful CPU and not the GPU. Anyway, if you have any questions, comments, leave them down below. I'm about to die here. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and have a good one.